Dexter's fingers trembled as they hovered over the activation sequence. The gravitational disruptor hummed beneath the laboratory floor, its crystalline core pulsing with contained energy that could reshape reality itself. Through the reinforced viewport, the barren planet Keth-7 hung like a rust-colored marble against the star field, its surface scarred by millennia of cosmic debris. Dexter. Claire's voice cut through the tension, her blue eyes fixed on the readouts streaming across her console. The Kha'vren diplomatic vessel is in position. They're watching. He glanced at her, noting the way she tucked a strand of her short black hair behind her ear, a tell he'd learned to recognize over their years together. She was nervous, but her shoulders remained squared, her confidence unwavering, even as they prepared to test a weapon that could either save humanity or damn it. Signal strength is optimal, she continued, her hands moving decisively across the holographic interface. Their council is linked in. Ambassador Veltar is present. The alien's bioluminescent form flickered on the communication screen, its skin patterns shifting in what Dexter had learned to interpret as skeptical amusement. The 7-foot creature stood motionless in its ship's command center, surrounded by lesser Kha'vren whose own patterns pulsed with synchronized disdain. Humans, the ambassador's voice resonated through the speakers, each word deliberate and measured. You persist in this futile demonstration. Your species has 72 hours to accept our terms. Show us your weapon if you must, but know that it will not alter your fate. Dexter's jaw tightened, his green eyes sharp despite the stress lines that framed them, fixed on the planet below. Keth-7 was strategically positioned between two key hyperspace lanes. Destroying it would send a message the Kha'vren Empire couldn't ignore. But more than that, it would prove that humanity, despite being confined to a single world, possessed the ingenuity to challenge a galactic power. Gravitational field generators are synchronized, Claire reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to unleash. Core stability is within acceptable parameters. Dexter nodded, his fingers finding the familiar rhythm of tapping against his thigh. The gesture had become automatic over the years, a metronome for his racing thoughts. This wasn't just about the weapon, it was about redemption. 10 years ago, his experimental fusion reactor had failed catastrophically, killing 17 researchers and ending his career. The scientific community had branded him reckless, dangerous. Now, in humanity's darkest hour, he had a chance to prove them wrong. Initiating gravitational cascade, he announced, his voice carrying the quiet fervor that always emerged when he was truly inspired. The disruptor's core brightened, bathing the laboratory in an ethereal blue glow. Through the quantum field manipulators, he could feel the fabric of space-time beginning to warp around the target planet. The ambassador's skin patterns shifted, the bioluminescence flickering with what might have been curiosity. Interesting energy signatures, it admitted, its tone losing some of its condescension. But we have witnessed stellar manipulation before. The words died as Keth-7 began to change. At first it was subtle, a slight elongation along the equator as if the planet were being gently stretched. But then the gravitational forces intensified, and the world began to tear itself apart from within. The crust cracked in perfect geometric patterns, revealing the molten core beneath as tidal forces pulled the planet's mass in opposing directions. Impossible, one of the lesser Kha'vren whispered, its patterns flashing in rapid, panicked bursts. Dexter's fingers moved across the controls with practiced precision, fine-tuning the gravitational field to ensure a clean separation. This wasn't about destruction for its own sake. It was about demonstrating absolute control over forces that should have been beyond human comprehension. The planet split along its equatorial plane, the two halves drifting apart in a cascade of debris and cooling magma. Claire's breath caught as she watched the spectacle unfold on her screens. The energy readings were perfect, the gravitational waves propagating exactly as Dexter's equations had predicted. But she could see something else in the data. Secondary effects rippling outward from the destroyed world, subtle distortions in the local space-time metric that made her stomach tighten with unease. "Message received," Ambassador Veltar said finally, its voice carrying a note of respect that hadn't been there before. The alien's towering form leaned forward slightly, its skin pattern shifting to what Dexter recognized as deep contemplation. "We will reconsider our timeline." The connection terminated, leaving the laboratory in silence except for the disruptor's slowly fading hum. Dexter slumped back in his chair, the weight of what they'd accomplished settling over him like a heavy cloak. They'd done it. They'd given humanity a fighting chance. But as he caught Claire's eye, he saw his own uncertainty reflected there. The weapon worked, perhaps too well, and something in the way space itself had responded to their demonstration suggested that their victory might come at a cost they hadn't yet calculated. 3 years earlier, the rain hammered against the windows of the abandoned research station, each drop a reminder of how far Dexter had fallen. The facility had been decommissioned after the Prometheus incident, its gleaming laboratories reduced to empty rooms filled with dust and the ghosts of his failures. He sat hunched over a makeshift desk, surrounded by towers of handwritten equations and salvaged quantum processors, trying to solve problems that the scientific establishment had declared impossible. The sound of footsteps echoed through the corridors, deliberate and familiar. Dexter didn't look up from his calculations as Claire entered the room, her athletic frame silhouetted against the harsh fluorescent lighting he'd jury-rigged from emergency power cells. "You look terrible," she said, setting down a steaming cup of coffee beside his work. Her blue eyes took in the chaos of papers and equipment with the analytical precision he remembered from her graduate studies. "When was the last time you slept?" "Sleep is for people who haven't doomed humanity to extinction," he muttered, adjusting glasses that weren't there. A nervous habit that had persisted even after his prescription had been corrected years ago. "The Kha'vren First Contact protocols are a facade, Claire. They're not here to negotiate. They're here to assess our threat level before they decide whether to enslave us or exterminate us." Claire pulled up a chair, her movements deliberate and controlled. She wore the same practical jumpsuit she'd favored during her time as his student, but the years had added a sharpness to her features, a confidence that came from surviving in a world that had branded her mentor a pariah. "The fusion reactor wasn't your fault," she said quietly. "The containment field fluctuations were predictable if I'd run the proper simulations," Dexter interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of 10 years of self-recrimination. 17 people died because I was too arrogant to consider the variables that didn't fit my elegant equations." Claire leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. "And now you're trying to build a weapon that could kill billions more?" "I'm trying to build a weapon that could save billions more." He finally looked up, his green eyes blazing with the intensity that had once made him the most promising physicist of his generation. "The gravitational disruptor isn't about destruction. It's about demonstrating that humanity possesses capabilities the Kha'vren haven't accounted for." She studied his notes, her sharp mind quickly parsing the complex mathematics that filled every available surface. The equations were elegant, describing how focused gravitational waves could be used to literally tear apart the molecular bonds holding matter together. But more than that, they represented a leap in theoretical understanding that would revolutionize humanity's relationship with the cosmos. "You're talking about weaponizing space-time itself," she said, her voice tinged with awe and horror. "The energy requirements alone are manageable with the right exotic matter configuration," Dexter finished. "I've been working on the theoretical framework since before Prometheus. The math is sound, Claire, but I need help building it." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze shifting from the equations to his face. The man before her was a shadow of the brilliant professor who had inspired her to pursue theoretical physics, but something in his eyes reminded her of why she'd followed him into this exile. "The University Review Board made it clear that working with you would be career suicide," she said finally. "Half the scientific community still thinks you're a dangerous madman." "And the other half?" "Thinks you're a dangerous madman who might be humanity's only hope." She stood, her decision made. "I'll help you, but we do this right. No shortcuts, no assumptions. Every calculation gets checked and double-checked." Dexter's shoulders relaxed for the first time in months. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Over the following weeks, The abandoned station was transformed into a clandestine laboratory. Claire's connections in the underground scientific community provided access to materials and equipment that should have been impossible to obtain. Young engineers, brilliant outcasts, and researchers who had been marginalized by the mainstream establishment found their way to the facility, drawn by rumors of Dexter's work. The disruptor itself began to take shape in the deepest sublevel of the station. Its core was a sphere of crystallized exotic matter, held in perfect suspension by a web of quantum field generators. The mathematics behind its operation were staggering in their complexity, requiring computational power that pushed the boundaries of human technology. "The theoretical framework is solid," Claire announced during one of their late-night sessions, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface as she refined the targeting algorithms. "But I'm seeing some concerning secondary effects in the simulation data." Dexter paused in his work, his stylus frozen mid-equation. "What kind of secondary effects?" "Gravitational ripples. When we disrupt the target's mass distribution, we're not just affecting the immediate area, we're sending waves through the local space-time metric. The effects could propagate for light years." He frowned, his mind racing through the implications. "The simulations show the waves dissipating within acceptable parameters." "The simulations assume a perfect vacuum," Claire countered. "In reality, we're dealing with stellar masses, dark matter distributions, quantum fluctuations. There are too many variables to account for." For a moment, the old Dexter might have dismissed her concerns, too focused on the elegant theory to consider the messy realities of implementation. But 10 years of guilt had taught him to listen to warnings, especially from someone whose judgment he trusted implicitly. "We'll run additional simulations," he said finally. "Model every possible interaction, no matter how unlikely. If there's a risk, we need to understand it." Claire nodded, satisfied. As the weeks turned to months, their partnership evolved from teacher and student to something more complex. Two brilliant minds united by a common purpose, each balancing the other's strengths and weaknesses. She provided the strategic thinking and careful analysis that his impulsive genius needed, while he offered the theoretical breakthroughs that could turn their desperate gamble into humanity's salvation. The disruptor was nearly complete when the first Kha'vren ships appeared at the edge of the solar system. The alien empire's ultimatum was simple: surrender unconditionally or face extinction. Humanity had 72 hours to decide. In the hidden laboratory, Dexter and Claire worked feverishly to complete their weapon. The fate of their species hung in the balance, and they were running out of time. The emergency session of the United Earth Council convened in the pre-dawn hours, its members arriving under heavy security to the reinforced bunker complex beneath Geneva. Through the main display screen, the Kha'vren fleet hung like a constellation of malevolent stars at the edge of the solar system. Over 200 vessels, each one larger than Earth's most powerful battleships. Claire stood at the back of the chamber, her arms crossed as she watched the debate unfold. The world's leaders sat in concentric circles around a central podium, their faces grave in the harsh lighting. She'd seen these same expressions during the climate crisis, during the resource wars, during every existential threat humanity had faced. But this was different. This time, there was nowhere to run. "The Kha'vren ambassador has made their terms clear," announced Secretary General Morrison, his voice carrying the weight of his 70 years. "Complete surrender of our governmental systems, cessation of all weapons development, and acceptance of imperial oversight. In return, they promise to preserve our species as a client state." "Slaves," muttered General Harrison, the aging military leader's scarred jaw working as he spoke. "They want us as slaves." "They want us as subjects," corrected Dr. Yenza, the chief xenobiologist. "Our analysis suggests the Kha'vren operate on a strict hierarchical system. Non-compliance isn't just disobedience, it's a fundamental threat to their worldview." Claire felt her phone vibrate and glanced down to see a message from Dexter. "Disruptor at 85% operational capacity. Need 12 more hours." She typed back quickly, "You may not have it." On the main screen, Ambassador Veltar's image flickered to life. The alien's towering form dominated the display, its bioluminescent skin patterns shifting in what humanity had learned to interpret as barely controlled impatience. The creature's lack of visible eyes made it impossible to read its expressions, but the rapid pulsing of its skin suggested agitation. "Humans," it began, its voice resonating through the chamber's acoustic systems. "You have deliberated for 18 of your hours. We require your decision." President Beaver of the Pacific Federation leaned forward. "We need more time to consider." "Time is what you lack," the ambassador interrupted. "Your species has demonstrated remarkable ingenuity and violence. Your history speaks of weapons that could sterilize worlds, of conflicts that nearly destroyed your own civilization. We cannot permit such dangerous creativity to spread beyond your system." "Then why not simply destroy us?" asked Prime Minister Okafor of the African Union. "Why offer terms at all?" The alien's skin patterns shifted, the bioluminescence taking on deeper hues. "Because your species shows potential. Properly guided, humanity could serve the Empire well, but that guidance requires absolute submission to our authority." Claire felt her jaw tighten. She'd studied the Kha'vren for months, analyzing their communication patterns, their social structures, their military tactics. They weren't evil in any human sense. They were simply convinced of their own superiority. To them, humanity was a clever but dangerous child that needed to be controlled for the good of the galaxy. "We have a responsibility to our people," Secretary General Morrison said carefully. "Surely you can understand the need for careful consideration of such momentous decisions." "We understand the need for efficiency," the ambassador replied. "You have 54 hours remaining. Use them wisely." The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in tense silence. Claire watched as the world's leaders began to fracture along predictable lines, the military faction arguing for hopeless resistance, the diplomatic wing pushing for negotiated surrender, the scientific community demanding more time to develop alternatives. "There is another option," she said, her voice cutting through the murmured debates. The chamber fell silent as hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Claire straightened, drawing on every ounce of confidence she'd developed over years of defending controversial research. "Dr. Claire Cook," she announced, though many of them already knew her by reputation. "I've been working with Dr. Dexter Voss on a project that could change the strategic balance of this confrontation." A ripple of unease passed through the assembly. Dexter's name was still synonymous with disaster in many circles, his involvement in any project seen as a liability rather than an asset. "The disruptor weapon is nearly operational," she continued, ignoring the skeptical murmurs. "It's designed to demonstrate humanity's technological capabilities in a way that will force the Kha'vren to reconsider their assumptions about our species." General Harrison leaned forward, his dark eyes sharp with interest. "What kind of weapon?" "A gravitational disruptor capable of tearing apart planetary bodies through focused space-time manipulation," Claire replied. "The theoretical framework is sound, and initial tests have confirmed the underlying principles." "Dexter Voss nearly destroyed half of Europe with his last sound theoretical framework," Senator Williams interjected, his voice carrying years of political conditioning. "Are we really considering trusting him with humanity's survival?" "We're considering trusting his brilliance with humanity's survival," Claire shot back. "The same brilliance that revolutionized our understanding of quantum mechanics, that laid the groundwork for faster-than-light communication, that could give us the edge we need to survive as a free species." President Beaver stood, his weathered face thoughtful. "Assuming this weapon works as advertised, what would be the strategic implications?" "It would demonstrate that humanity possesses capabilities the Kha'vren haven't accounted for," Claire explained. "Their entire expansion strategy is based on overwhelming technological superiority. If we can prove that assumption wrong, we force them to negotiate from a position of uncertainty rather than absolute confidence." "And if it fails?" asked Prime Minister Okafor. Claire met her gaze steadily. "Then, we'll be in the same position we're in now, except we'll have tried to fight for our freedom instead of surrendering it." The debate continued for hours, with representatives arguing over projections, risk assessments, and the moral implications of deploying an untested weapon. But Claire could see the tide turning. Fear was giving way to desperate hope, and desperation was humanity's greatest strength. Finally, Secretary General Morrison called for a vote. The result was narrow, 148 votes in favor, 142 against, with 27 abstentions, but it was enough. Dr. Cook, Morrison said formally, the United Earth Council hereby authorizes the deployment of the Gravitational Disruptor, subject to final technical approval and operational oversight. Claire nodded, her heart racing. You'll have it. As the session adjourned, she was already sending a message to Dexter. We're authorized. Complete the weapon. The future of humanity depends on it. His response came immediately. Understood. Beginning final calibration sequence. We won't let them down. But as Claire hurried back to the hidden laboratory, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to cross a line from which there would be no return. The disruptor would work. She was certain of that. What worried her were the consequences they hadn't yet discovered, the variables that even their most sophisticated simulations couldn't predict. Humanity was about to announce its presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. She just hoped they were ready for what came next. The hidden laboratory hummed with desperate energy as technicians made final adjustments to the gravitational disruptor. Dexter stood at the central console, his graying hair even more disheveled than usual, his green eyes bloodshot from 36 hours of continuous work. The weapon's crystalline core pulsed with contained power, its exotic matter configuration generating fields that bent light itself around the chamber. Core stability is holding at 97%, reported the engineer, his young face bright with exhaustion and excitement. His oil-stained hands moved constantly across the holographic interfaces, fine-tuning parameters that would have been incomprehensible to most physicists. The quantum field generators are synchronized, and the targeting system is locked onto the test coordinates. Claire monitored the readings from her station, her blue eyes scanning data streams that painted a picture of barely controlled forces. The disruptor was ready for a full-scale demonstration, but something in the preliminary energy patterns made her stomach tighten with unease. Dexter, she called, her voice cutting through the laboratory's controlled chaos. I'm seeing anomalous readings in the gravitational wave propagation models. The secondary effects are stronger than we predicted. He looked up from his calculations, his fingers pausing in their rhythmic tapping. Define stronger. The gravitational waves aren't dissipating as cleanly as our simulations suggested. There's a resonance effect with the local spacetime metric that could amplify the disturbance beyond the immediate target area. For a moment, the old Dexter might have dismissed her concerns, too focused on the elegant theory to worry about messy implementation details. But 10 years of guilt had taught him to listen to warnings, especially from someone whose judgment he trusted implicitly. How much amplification, he asked. Potentially significant. The waves could propagate for several light years, interacting with any massive objects in their path. Claire's fingers moved across her console, pulling up a three-dimensional model of the local stellar region. There's a small system about 2 parsecs from the target coordinates. Nothing inhabited, but the resonance effects could be unpredictable. The laboratory fell silent except for the disruptor's steady hum. The weapon was ready, humanity's leaders were waiting, and the Kha'vren deadline was approaching with inexorable certainty. But the scientist in both of them recognized the implications of what Claire was describing. We could adjust the targeting parameters, suggested the engineer, his youthful optimism undimmed by the technical complications. Focus the gravitational pulse more tightly, reduce the propagation distance. That would decrease the weapon's effectiveness, Dexter replied, his mind racing through the mathematical implications. The demonstration needs to be unambiguous, a clear proof of our capabilities. And if the secondary effects cause unintended damage, Claire asked. The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Through the laboratory's reinforced windows, they could see the first hints of dawn breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Somewhere above, the Kha'vren fleet waited with patient certainty, confident in their overwhelming superiority. The risks are acceptable, Dexter said finally, his voice carrying the quiet conviction that had once made him the most promising physicist of his generation. Humanity's survival trumps theoretical concerns about distant star systems. Claire studied his face, seeing the determination that had driven him through 10 years of exile and failure. She understood his reasoning, but something in the data patterns troubled her in ways she couldn't articulate. "Run the test," she said finally, "but we monitor everything: gravitational waves, quantum fluctuations, space-time distortions. If we're going to demonstrate our capabilities, we need to understand exactly what we're capable of." The next several hours passed in a blur of final preparations. The Disruptor's targeting system locked onto Keth-7, the barren world that would serve as their demonstration target. The planet was strategically positioned and utterly lifeless, a perfect choice for showing the weapon's power without committing genocide. As the final countdown began, Claire found herself thinking about the moment that had brought them to this point. Humanity had spent millennia dreaming of contact with alien civilizations, imagining peaceful exchanges of knowledge and culture. Instead, they'd been met with an ultimatum that reduced their entire species to a binary choice: submit or die. "Gravitational cascade initiating," Dexter announced, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to unleash. The Disruptor's core blazed with energy, and through the quantum field manipulators, they could feel the fabric of reality beginning to warp. The planet began to change almost immediately. At first it was subtle, a slight elongation along the equatorial axis, as if Keth-7 were being gently stretched. But then the gravitational forces intensified, and the world began to tear itself apart from within. "Energy output is within predicted parameters," the engineer reported, his voice filled with wonder. "The gravitational field is propagating perfectly." Claire watched the readings stream across her console, her analytical mind cataloging every detail of the weapon's performance. The Disruptor was working exactly as Dexter's equations had predicted, but she could see the secondary effects beginning to manifest: subtle distortions in the space-time metric that spread outward from the target like ripples in a pond. Keth-7 split along its equatorial plane, the two halves drifting apart in a cascade of debris and cooling magma. The demonstration was perfect, a clear proof of humanity's technological sophistication that would force the Kha'vren to reconsider their assumptions. But as the immediate effects of the weapon's discharge began to fade, Claire's instruments detected something that made her blood run cold. The gravitational waves were indeed propagating beyond the target area, but they were doing so in a pattern that defied their most sophisticated models. "Dexter," she called urgently, "the secondary effects, they're not following the predicted decay curve." He looked up from his celebration, his expression shifting from triumph to concern. "What do you mean?" "The gravitational waves are maintaining coherence far longer than they should. Instead of dissipating, they're actually gaining strength as they interact with the local dark matter distribution." The implications hit both of them simultaneously. The weapon had worked perfectly, perhaps too perfectly. They had created a gravitational disturbance that was propagating through space with unpredictable consequences, heading toward star systems that might not be prepared for such exotic effects. "How long until the waves reach the nearest stellar system?" Dexter asked, his voice tight with growing dread. Claire's fingers flew across her console, running calculations that painted an increasingly troubling picture. "At current propagation rates, 18 months, maybe less." The laboratory fell silent as the full magnitude of their situation became clear. They had successfully demonstrated humanity's technological capabilities, but they had also potentially created a weapon that could destabilize entire star systems. The same brilliance that might save their species could also mark them as a threat to the galaxy itself. "We need to inform the Council," Claire said quietly. "They need to know what we've done." Dexter nodded, his shoulders sagging under the weight of another potential catastrophe. "And we need to figure out how to stop it." As alarms began to sound throughout the facility, signaling the successful completion of their test, both scientists realized that their greatest challenge wasn't demonstrating humanity's power, it was learning to control it before it destroyed everything they were trying to protect. The transmission from the Kha'vren fleet arrived exactly 18 hours after the destruction of Keth-7, But it wasn't the expected diplomatic response. Instead, Ambassador Veltar's image flickered to life on emergency channels across Earth's communication networks, its bioluminescent patterns pulsing with an urgency that set humanity's leaders on edge. "This is a priority transmission to all human authorities," the alien's voice resonated through the United Earth Council chambers. "The gravitational disturbance you have created extends far beyond your demonstration target. Our deep space sensors are detecting coherent gravitational waves propagating toward the Xerion system at superluminal velocities." Claire felt her blood turn to ice as she stood in the emergency session. Around her, the world's leaders exchanged confused glances, most of them lacking the physics background to understand the implications of what they were hearing. "The Xerion system contains a binary star configuration on the edge of gravitational instability," the ambassador continued. "Your weapon's secondary effects could trigger a cascade collapse, resulting in a supernova that would sterilize 17 inhabited systems." Secretary General Morrison leaned forward, his weathered face pale. "Are you saying our weapon could cause a star to explode?" "We are saying your weapon is already causing a star to destabilize," Veltar replied, its skin patterns shifting to what Claire recognized as barely controlled alarm. "The gravitational waves will reach Xerion in 14 standard months. If the resonance effects continue to amplify, the stellar collapse will be inevitable." The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives shouted questions, demanded explanations, and pointed fingers at each other with the kind of panic that had marked every major crisis in human history. But Claire barely heard them. Her mind was racing through the implications of what the ambassador had revealed. "Dr. Cook," Morrison called out, his voice cutting through the tumult, "you assured us the weapon's effects would be localized. How is this possible?" Claire stood slowly, her legs unsteady. "The secondary gravitational effects were underestimated in our models. We predicted wave propagation, but not the kind of resonance amplification the ambassador is describing." "Underestimated?" Senator Williams's voice cracked with disbelief. "You mean we've potentially committed genocide on a galactic scale?" "We mean," said a new voice from the chamber's entrance, "that we've created a problem that requires immediate attention." Dexter entered the council chamber, his appearance even more disheveled than usual. His green eyes blazed with the intensity of a man who had spent sleepless hours wrestling with equations that could determine the fate of billions. Behind him, the engineer followed nervously, carrying a portable data unit. "Dr. Voss," Morrison said coldly, "I wasn't aware you had been invited to address the council." "I wasn't," Dexter replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once made him the most respected physicist of his generation. "But the situation has changed. The gravitational waves aren't just propagating, they're evolving." He gestured to the engineer, who activated the data unit. A three-dimensional hologram appeared above the chamber floor, showing the local galactic region with bright lines indicating the path of the gravitational disturbance. "The waves are interacting with dark matter filaments in ways we never predicted," Dexter explained. "Instead of dissipating, they're actually gaining coherence and strength. The resonance effects are turning our demonstration shot into a weapon of mass destruction." Ambassador Veltar's image shifted, the alien's attention focusing on the human physicist. "You claim to understand the nature of this catastrophe?" "I claim to understand the physics behind it," Dexter replied. "The gravitational waves are following dark matter conduits, using them as a transmission medium that amplifies their effects. It's elegant, terrifying, and completely unprecedented." "Then you can stop it," the ambassador said, its skin patterns shifting to something that might have been hope. The chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to Dexter. Claire watched him wrestle with the question, seeing the same look of intense calculation that had marked his work on the disruptor. But this time, there was something else in his expression, a fear that went beyond personal consequences. "Theoretically, yes," he said finally. "We could generate a counterwave, a gravitational pulse designed to cancel out the existing disturbance, but it would require precise timing, exact positioning, and a level of energy output that would push the disruptor beyond its design parameters." "What are the risks?" asked President Beaver. The risks are that we fail and accelerate the stellar collapse, Dexter replied, or that we succeed and create an even larger disturbance. The mathematics are complex. Claire stepped forward, her mind already working through the implications. We need to attempt it. The alternative is watching 17 star systems die because of our mistake. Your mistake, Senator Williams corrected angrily. This is exactly what we feared would happen when we authorized this project. Dexter Voss has once again created a catastrophe that could destroy millions of lives. Dr. Voss has created a solution to humanity's immediate survival, Claire shot back. The fact that it has unintended consequences doesn't change the reality that we needed to demonstrate our capabilities to the Kha'vren. At what cost? Demanded General Harrison. If we're responsible for a galactic catastrophe, we'll have proved their point about human recklessness. Ambassador Veltar's image flickered as the alien processed the human debate. Your species' capacity for both brilliance and destruction is remarkable, but the immediate concern is containment. Dr. Voss, what do you require to implement your solution? Dexter's fingers began their familiar tapping rhythm as he considered the question. Access to the Deep Space Monitoring Network, real-time gravitational wave data from the affected region, and authorization to modify the disruptor for counterwave generation. And personnel, Claire added, will need a team capable of operating in hostile space. The counterwave will have to be deployed from within the Kha'vren sphere of influence. The implications of what she was suggesting hit the chamber like a physical blow. They weren't just talking about fixing their mistake. They were talking about a mission that would require human teams to operate in alien territory, possibly in direct conflict with Kha'vren forces. We will provide safe passage, Ambassador Veltar said after a long pause. The Empire has no interest in galactic catastrophe. Your team will be granted temporary diplomatic immunity. Secretary General Morrison looked around the chamber, seeing the weight of decision in every face. Dr. Voss, Dr. Cook, you have the Council's authorization. But understand, if this mission fails, humanity will bear responsibility for one of the greatest disasters in galactic history. And if it succeeds, asked Claire, then perhaps your species will prove worthy of the respect you're fighting to earn, the ambassador replied. As the session adjourned, Claire found herself standing beside Dexter in the emptying chamber. The weight of their situation pressed down on them both, but she could see something in his eyes that reminded her of the brilliant professor who had inspired her to pursue theoretical physics. We can do this, she said quietly. We created the problem and we can solve it. Dexter nodded, his expression grim but determined. We'll need the navigator for plotting the course, the engineer for technical support, and a small team capable of operating under extreme conditions. And each other, Claire added, meeting his gaze. We've come this far together. We finish it together. As they left the chamber to begin preparations for what might be humanity's most crucial mission, both scientists understood that they were racing against time itself. The gravitational waves were already propagating toward Xerion, carrying with them the potential for devastation on a scale that defied imagination. But they also carried something else, proof that humanity possessed the ingenuity to solve even the most complex problems, no matter how dangerous the consequences. Whether that would be enough to save 17 star systems and secure their species' future remained to be seen. The abandoned research station felt like a tomb in the 3 days following the Council's revelation. Dexter had barely left his laboratory, surrounded by towers of quantum processors and holographic displays that painted the walls with equations describing gravitational catastrophe. The coffee Claire had brought him hours ago sat untouched and cold, another reminder of his inability to see beyond his own brilliant theories. The counterwave calculations are complete, he announced to the empty room, his voice hoarse from disuse. Theoretical framework is sound, implementation is possible, success probability is. He paused, the word low hanging unspoken in the air. Claire entered the lab then, her face etched with exhaustion, but her eyes still sharp and focused. She carried a fresh cup of coffee, which she placed gently beside the cold one. No time for self-pity, Dexter, she said, her voice firm but not unkind. The Kha'vren have granted us a temporary diplomatic window. Ambassador Veltar is providing coordinates for a rendezvous point within their territory. We depart in 6 hours." Dexter finally looked up, his green eyes meeting hers. 6 hours? That's barely enough time to recalibrate the disruptor for a counterpulse, let alone prepare for a deep space mission. "It's what we have," Claire replied, pulling up a holographic schematic of the disruptor. "The modifications for counterwave generation are complex. We'll need to reconfigure the exotic matter core to emit a precise phase-shifted gravitational pulse. The timing has to be perfect, down to the picosecond, or we risk amplifying the original wave instead of canceling it." The engineer, a young man named Kale, whose enthusiasm seemed to defy the grim reality of their situation, joined them. "I've been running simulations on the energy requirements. To generate a counterwave strong enough to cancel the Xerion disturbance, we're looking at pushing the disruptor to 120% of its design parameters. There's a significant risk of core overload." Dexter ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Core overload means a localized singularity. We'd take out half the solar system." "Which is why we're doing this in deep space within Kha'vren territory," Claire stated. "If it goes wrong, at least Earth is safe. Ambassador Veltar has provided a detailed star chart of the affected region and the predicted propagation path of the gravitational waves. The Xerion system is a binary pair, with 17 inhabited planets in orbit. The primary star is a red giant already unstable. Our wave is essentially nudging it towards collapse. So, we're going to fly into the heart of their empire with a weapon that could destroy us all to fix a mistake we made trying to save ourselves from them," Kale summarized, a nervous laugh escaping him. "Precisely," Dexter said, a grim smile touching his lips. "Welcome to humanity's desperate gamble." Over the next 6 hours, the hidden laboratory became a whirlwind of activity. Technicians, driven by a shared sense of impending doom and a fierce loyalty to Dexter and Claire, worked with a speed and precision that defied human limits. The disruptor, still humming with residual energy from its previous demonstration, was carefully reconfigured. New conduits were installed, exotic matter regulators were fine-tuned, and the targeting algorithms were rewritten to account for the complex physics of wave cancellation. Claire oversaw the logistical nightmare of preparing for the mission. A small elite team was assembled. Kale, the brilliant engineer, Dr. Eris Thorne, a seasoned astrophysicist with an encyclopedic knowledge of stellar dynamics, and Commander Eva Rostova, a former deep space pilot whose calm under pressure was legendary. Their ship, the Odyssey, was a stripped-down research vessel, fast and maneuverable, but utterly unsuited for combat. As the Odyssey lifted off from the hidden facility, piercing the pre-dawn sky, Dexter watched Earth recede, a fragile blue marble against the vast blackness. He felt a familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach, a ghost of the Prometheus incident. This time, however, the stakes were infinitely higher. The journey to the rendezvous point was tense. The Odyssey maintained strict radio silence, relying on pre-programmed jump coordinates provided by the Kha'vren. They passed through several Kha'vren patrol lanes, their sensors picking up the faint energy signatures of alien warships, but no hails or challenges came. Ambassador Veltar, it seemed, was true to their word. When they finally arrived at the designated coordinates, a massive Kha'vren dreadnought, easily 10 times the size of the Odyssey, hung silently in space. Its bioluminescent hull pulsed with a deep, unsettling purple. A smaller Kha'vren shuttle detached from the dreadnought and approached them. Ambassador Veltar appeared on the Odyssey's main screen, its form flickering with what seemed to be a mix of apprehension and grim determination. "Dr. Voss, Dr. Reeves, welcome. Our sensors confirm the gravitational wave is accelerating its propagation towards Xerion. You have approximately 12 standard months before stellar collapse." "We understand the urgency, Ambassador," Claire replied. "Our disruptor is reconfigured. We need precise real-time data on the wave's phase and amplitude as it approaches Xerion. Our models are good, but direct observation is critical for a successful counterpulse." "Our deep space observatories are already feeding data to your vessel," Veltar confirmed. "We have also deployed a network of gravitational sensors around the Xerion system to provide the most accurate readings possible. However, the energy required for your counterpulse is substantial. Our engineers estimate a significant risk to your vessel and crew." "We're aware of the risks," Dexter said, his voice steady. "Commander Rostova, prepare for transit to the deployment zone. Kale, Aris, begin integrating the Kha'vren data into our targeting system." The Odyssey jumped again, deeper into Kha'vren space, towards the edge of the Zirion system. The data streaming in from the Kha'vren sensors was overwhelming, a torrent of gravitational wave patterns, stellar instability readings, and dark matter distribution maps. Kale and Aris worked feverishly, their fingers flying across holographic interfaces, translating the complex alien data into parameters their disruptor could understand. "The wave is interacting with a dense dark matter filament about 3 light days from Zirion," Aris reported, his voice tight with concentration. "It's causing a localized amplification effect, just as Dexter predicted. If we can target that filament, we might be able to dissipate the wave more efficiently." "It's a narrow window," Kale added. "The counterpulse has to hit that filament at the exact moment the primary wave crests. Any deviation, and we risk making it worse." Dexter watched the holographic representation of the gravitational wave, a shimmering invisible force rippling through the cosmos. He felt a strange sense of awe mixed with dread. He had unleashed this, a force of nature born of human ingenuity. Now he had to rein it in. "Commander Rostova, position us at coordinates Gamma 7. We need to be precisely aligned with that dark matter filament," Dexter ordered. Ava Rostova, her face a mask of calm focus, executed the complex maneuvers with practiced ease. The Odyssey drifted into position, its hull groaning under the subtle gravitational stresses of the impending counterpulse. "Gravitational Disruptor is online and charged to 150% capacity," Kale announced, his voice trembling slightly. "Core temperature is rising rapidly." "Ambassador Veltar, we are initiating the counterpulse," Claire transmitted. "Stand by for impact." Veltar's image flickered on the screen. "We are prepared. May your efforts be successful, humans." Dexter took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the activation sequence. This was it, the culmination of years of work, of guilt, of desperate hope. He saw Claire standing beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a silent gesture of support. "Initiating counter-gravitational cascade," Dexter announced, his voice clear and steady. The disruptor's core flared with an blinding white light, brighter than anything they had witnessed before. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the Odyssey's deck, growing in intensity until it felt like the very fabric of space-time was tearing around them. Through the reinforced viewport, a shimmering, invisible wave of energy erupted from the ship, racing towards the dark matter filament. On the holographic display, the two gravitational waves met. For a terrifying moment, they seemed to amplify each other, the lines on the display spiking wildly. Alarms blared throughout the ship. "Core overload," Kale screamed, his hands flying across the controls, trying to vent excess energy. "We're losing containment." "Hold it, Kale," Dexter roared, his eyes fixed on the display. "It's a phase shift. It's working." Slowly, agonizingly, the wild spikes on the display began to flatten. The two waves, one of destruction and one of salvation, began to cancel each other out. The shimmering light from the disruptor's core dimmed, and the terrifying hum subsided. A collective sigh of relief swept through the bridge. Kale slumped against his console, wiping sweat from his brow. Aris Thorne stared at the data, his mouth agape. "The wave is dissipating," Claire whispered, her voice filled with a profound sense of awe. "It's collapsing in on itself. The Zirion system is stable." On the main screen, Ambassador Veltar's patterns shifted rapidly, a kaleidoscope of colors that spoke of astonishment and relief. "Unbelievable. The gravitational disturbance has been neutralized. The Zirion system is no longer at risk." Dexter leaned back in his chair, the tension draining from his body, leaving him utterly exhausted. He had done it. He had fixed his mistake. "Ambassador," Claire said, her voice regaining its usual composure, "we have demonstrated our capacity to solve problems, even those of our own making. Perhaps now we can discuss a new framework for interspecies relations." Veltar's patterns settled into a steady, thoughtful luminescence. "Indeed, your species has proven unpredictable and remarkably resilient. The Kha'vren Empire will reconsider its assessment of humanity. A new era of dialogue, perhaps even cooperation, may be possible." The transmission ended, leaving the Odyssey in a quiet hum of its own systems. The crew exchanged tired smiles, the weight of their impossible mission finally lifted. As the Odyssey began its long journey back to Earth, Dexter and Claire stood together on the bridge, watching the stars drift by. The vastness of space no longer felt like an empty void, but a canvas for both humanity's mistakes and its triumphs. "So what now, Dexter?" Claire asked, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Another impossible project? Another world to save?" He chuckled, a genuine, unburdened sound. "Perhaps, but first I think I'll get some sleep. And then maybe we can start thinking about how to use this disruptor for something other than cutting planets in half or saving star systems from our own blunders." The gravitational disruptor, once a symbol of humanity's desperate struggle for survival, now held the promise of a new future. It was a tool that could reshape reality, not just destroy it. With the Kha'vren now cautiously open to diplomacy and the immediate threat averted, humanity had earned a reprieve. The warning shot had been heard, and the galaxy was listening. The path forward would be challenging, filled with new discoveries and unforeseen consequences, but for the first time in a long time, Dexter Voss felt a flicker of hope. The future, uncertain as it was finally theirs to shape.